Hello and welcome back to Moving Forward. I'm your host, Rachel Salyer, and you just saw the viral video titled The Story of Sushi. With us now is Dr. Elizabeth Erickson to tell us more about overfishing and the importance of sustainability. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
And you teach environmental economics here at the University of Akron.
Correct.
Are sustainability and overfishing topics that you discuss in your classes?
Yes, of course, being an economist, we're more likely to look at theory with overfishing as an example, but certainly we've looked at, our class has looked at overfishing. In fact, we've done it for a semi-true, but not quite true version of Lake Erie.
And what is the problem that is overfishing in your own words? What does that mean exactly?
Well, the problem with overfishing, which is the problem, as I said, we always talk in more general terms, is the problem of the common property resource. In other words, that it's a resource that is not owned by anybody. If you have a farm and you're going to be there for a long time, you own the earth, right? You will, officially, according to the law, you own the earth, and you're going to want to look after that soil because it's needed to grow your plants.
Right.
And so you don't let there be all of the soil run off, and because you do things to keep the soil conservation, and you do cause soil conservation measures, but because it's yours. Now, the original notion of the quote overfishing was done by a biologist rather than an economist who did it. He called it the tragedy of the commons. And he was talking about the common land that was owned in the Middle Ages by, well, nobody. And everybody was allowed to graze their animals on it. That sounded like a good idea because, poor people didn't have much and they could just graze on this land. What happened very, very quickly is it became totally overgrazed, and the soil, all the grass was taken off, the soil started to wash away, and there was nothing for the animals. And, well, why did that happen? And that's the problem that we have to look at, because overfishing is the same situation.
Right.
This is one which, no more than the soil, we can't, quote unquote, grow crops, right? It's the soil that's needed. And it's the same thing, we can grow fish in where we own private property, but usually we don't. It's out in the oceans. We harvest the fish, but does anyone own the oceans? Well, not exactly. And lo and behold, they get overused. And in sushi, it explains how the populations just crash for things like bluefish tuna, but huge numbers of species, herring, cod, virtually all the major fish species have been wildly overfished. And the reason is that no one owns the ocean.
Right.
Or everybody owns the ocean. And that's the problem. Now, why? The reason why is, think of it for that little piece of land. And you've got your animals, and you say, everybody else can use this grass as well as me, so I'd better hurry in there and use as much of it as I can, because if I don't, someone else will use it instead, right? And I won't have any left. So I charge in there with as many animals as I can, and they get them eat. And what's everybody else doing? Exactly the same thing. And then, and you know that it's going to cause a problem for other people.
Right.
But you're going to get the benefit in the meantime. And, well, they're not sort of important. So, and lo and behold, with everybody doing that, everybody rushes until it's all gone. Or where nobody's making a profit on it. And everybody has that incentive to rush out there. And in fishing, it becomes even worse because there's more and more new technology which gets bigger and bigger boats. So what would you do if you thought that everybody else was going to rush out there? What would you do? Get the hugest boat you can, right?
Yes.
And charge out there and slurp in as many fish as you can because someone else would otherwise. Now, if you owned it, you would recognize that you were going to wipe out the fish, right? And you had to be very careful because over time, you would be thinking, I won't have it just this year, it'll be next year and the year after. But this one encourages you to think, it's here, I just got to get it.
So people are just thinking of the benefit right now instead of looking forward into the future.
And the point is, the future, even if they did look at the future, they'd say, but how can I do anything about it? Because everybody else isn't. Back in the Middle Ages, they dealt with that problem. They found they weren't dumb. And when it first started happening, then they all had to get together as a community and say, this is not working. So we're going to have to think of this as a community resource and make rules for it.
Yes, because people might think there are really simple solutions to the problem, like getting smaller boats or having a shorter fishing season or limiting. How come? Because clearly that hasn't worked, and how come that hasn't worked?
Well, partially, it's the kind of thing that you put in. Clearly what you have to do is reduce the catch, because overfishing here means that there's not enough fish available to breed and keep on for the next period. So we know exactly what that would be, and we know actually that what would be profitable, the most highly profitable, would be even less than that. So we want to keep the catch down. So one thing we do is say you can only catch so many fish. That's what they're doing up in Lake Erie, which isn't very commercial, and it's smaller than the Great Ocean. But you say there's only a certain amount of fish. But the problem with that is, how are you going to monitor it? How are you going to be sure that that's the right? Because what were people going to do? They're going to sneak out in the middle of the night, and there's going to be no inspector, right?
Right.
And can you tell? No, right? So that's one problem. With vessels, so another thing they do is, well, all right, something we can control is the time. You can only fish between this time and this time, so many months. And of course, then everybody rushes out with their biggest thing during those months.
Yes.
In fact, you can sometimes, in some places, the whole quota for a whole year is caught in 4 hours.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
So then some people say, well, let's just control it. You can't have big boats and you can't have technology. So then what do? Lots and lots of little boats, right?
Yes, whatever's going to get them the most fish right at that moment.
Right. So it is not an easy thing. Now, economists always have an economic solution, and some countries have done that.
And what are some of the solutions that other countries have implemented?
Well, it's called a international transfer quota. I think it's called. It's an ITL. That's the word I use. But anyway, you have a limit on the number of fish, and you get a permit for that number, a permit for every single fish, if you like. So you've got, suppose you could get for the whole of suppose you were able to take, 1,000 fish. And then what you would do would be to either give or sell permits for 1,000 fish. And if you've got a permit, you can fish. And now you wouldn't get 1,000, that'd be one person, but somebody gets 5, somebody gets 20, somebody gets 10. So then what do? The thing that you have to make sure your quotas are right and all those kinds of things. But you have to be able to transfer the quotas. You can buy and sell the quotas. So if one boat is really low cost, and remember they suppose they had to buy them to start with, but you could do it really efficiently, then you could make money selling your quota to someone else, because you really aren't very efficient, so you could make more money selling your quota to someone else rather than fish for yourself. And then people buy and sell the quotas, and it gives you some incentive to stay within the quotas. You still have to monitor. It's still a problem.
Yes.
And that's really a problem for things like the bluefin tuna, because they live out in waters that are beyond the 200-mile limit around countries. Countries have a 200 limit that is theirs.
Okay.
And so out in international waters, then you have to set up an ITLs. And New Zealand has done it really well. They've been able to get to sustainable fishing in lots of species using this method. But, they're a little island, and there's a sea all around them, and that's quite a lot. But, out in the middle of the Atlantic or the Pacific, you're stuck until you have an international agreement.
What are some of the possible effects on the economy and the environment if things continue the way they are now?
I mean, I think people are not going to continue the way they are, I hope. But if they do, we're going to be stuck with a whole lot of wild fish, which after all are naturally produced, and we don't have to put our resources into producing them, right, are going to get essentially non-fishable because there's so few of them that it's not worth catching them. And we're going to be forced to use just aquaculture. That is where, now we're back to the property thing, where you have somebody owns a piece of the ocean, usually quite close in, and they farm the fish. That, of course, causes a whole lot of environmental problems of its own, because how do you deal with the waste? What does it do to the ecology of the area? And a whole set of things like that. But that's all we'll be left with. And that's very important for poor countries, because in poor countries, they rely tremendously for their protein source on fish. And they haven't got the money to go produce fish for themselves.
Right.
So being able to harvest them is really, really important.
Well, Dr. Erickson, thank you so much for joining us today and shedding some light on this topic.
Good. Thank you so much.
Today on Moving Forward, we took a closer look into the issue of overfishing and how it will affect the future of sushi. Director Vincent Paone joined us via Skype to tell us all about his viral video highlighting the harmful effects of overfishing using only miniatures. Also, University of Akron professor Dr. Elizabeth Erickson just told us more about how overfishing can be put to an end. Be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at ztvmovingforward. Visit ztvmovingforward.com to see our latest clips and episodes. From all of us here on the Moving Forward team, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
This program was produced by ZTV at the University of Akron. To find out how you can make Emmy-winning media, visit the UA School of Communication online. ZTV. Make media. Make a difference.